Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising, which is the second program of a 5-day series on the inner work of aging. The populations of the United States, Canada, most of Europe, Russia, Japan are aging populations. And yet in the world at large, well over 50% of the entire human race is getting younger and younger and is under 25 years old. So that the global demographic is one of aging at one end of the spectrum and getting younger and younger at the other end of the spectrum, all within the context of a world whose ecosystem is spinning out of control, whose geostrategic balances and infrastructure is disintegrating due to war and conflict. And the challenge for all of us as we experience world events is to optimize what we can contribute, no matter how young we are, and certainly no matter how old we are. And this week, what we are delving into is the contributions and the responsibilities of people who are the baby boomer generation, the Gen Ys, as they mature, and how they can be contributing to the larger challenges of our time. Before we delve into that subject of what aging people can offer, let us pause, as we always do as we begin Humanity Rising, and just take 10 breaths in a coherent way. You'll see in a moment a card on the screen. It's a 5-pointed star. And just so you're luxuriating in the beauty of the universe, this is what the combined orbital pathways of the Earth and Venus create as they circumambulate the sun. It's a beautiful 5-pointed star. Now, we put this up because the breathing that we do, the coherent breathing that we do, is to the count of 5.5. So you'll hear a bell, and just breathe in slowly for about 5.5 seconds. You hear another bell and just exhale for about 5.5 seconds. That gives you 5.5 breaths per minute, which brings in 5.5 liters of air. It's one of the most ancient breathing techniques known to humankind. And the latest science, if you've read James Nestor's book, Breath, this 5.5 breathing technique optimizes all your body functions, and in particular, the coherence between your gut and your heart and your brain more quickly and more effectively than any other single breathing technique, and possibly any other single thing that you can do. So we like every session just to bring people into coherent breathing, because that expands our minds as it calms our hearts and makes us more available for deep inquiry. Thank you, everyone. Let us breathe together. Thank you, everyone. It's good to breathe together in the spirit of what Plotinus said many centuries ago, that the whole universe breathes as one. It's my pleasure to now introduce my good friend and colleague, Connie Zweig, who is convening this 5-day program. It just completed a splendid course on the shadow. She's the author of a number of bestsellers, Meeting the Shadow, Romancing the Shadow, and The Inner Work of Age. She's also the author of a book on Jalaluddin Rumi, the great Persian mystic and poet. She's been fascinated, as long as I've known Connie, with how people grapple with their shadow. And God knows, as we look around the world, Connie, the shadow is alive and well.
Screaming at us from the headlines, Jim.
And what Connie also has pointed out is that as we age, our experience and understanding of the shadow shifts. And so, Connie, I really welcome you to this program on Humanity Rising and turn the program over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Georg, behind the scenes. It's just a beautiful opportunity to be able to share. And every day of the week, there are these wonderful events on Humanity Rising that you can tune into. And from the range of topics, whatever you might be interested, you'll find something every single day of the work week. So as Jim mentioned, my book, The Inner Work of Age, Shifting from Role to Soul, extends my body of work on the shadow, or the personal unconscious, into life after midlife, for people who are over 50 and want to continue to explore their emotional and spiritual development alongside of our longevity, this unprecedented longevity that we have been given now for the first time in the history of humanity. All of the spiritual traditions teach us that later life is about contemplation, distilling the lessons that we've learned and finding a spiritual practice to move beyond ego and to connect with something greater than our own personal needs and desires. And if we do this inner work of age, we cross a threshold, we change archetypes and become an elder. So this week on Humanity Rising, I'm offering a rite of passage to become an elder, to move out of our unconscious denial about aging, or that part of us I call the inner ageist, to hear from leaders of organizations, as we're going to do today, people who are elder activists, and hear their invitations to invite us to contribute to the common good in community. Tomorrow, we're going to explore retirement and expand our awareness from what we do to who we are, from role to soul. And then the next day, we're going to reimagine the elder archetype in this particular cultural moment. And on Friday, we're going to learn about contemplative practices from well-known spiritual elders of diverse traditions, Tibetan Buddhist traditions, Zen tradition, Judaism, mystical Christianity. Renowned teachers will join us on Friday. So during these 5 days, I really hope that you will experience this rite of passage that's missing in our culture, to shift from senior to elder, or from role to soul. Today, we're going to focus on the question, what can one person do? And we're going to hear the call to serve the common good. Sacred service and social activism offer profound benefits, a sense of purpose, an end to isolation, an opportunity to contribute, and to leave a legacy. Millions of elders are volunteering, mentoring, assisting organizations with their skills, and joining with others to increase their impact. So today we're going to highlight the leaders of several communities who have heeded this call and they're learning and teaching and engaging their passions. And in the process of giving, they're renewed. I have been engaged with most of these communities, and I offer them to you if you have asked yourself, what can one person do? One person can join others and build momentum, forging bonds of purpose by engaging the critical issues of our day: climate change, racism, social justice, intergenerational work, and spirituality. I want to mention one group that's not represented here, and that is Saging International. Saging.org, SAGE-ING.org. Maybe you could put that in the chat, Georg. It's a community that offers a one-year program to become an elder, which I took myself before I wrote the book. And it was a deeply meaningful experience for me. And I recommend it to those who want a living rite of passage for this transition. Saging also offers a series on world wisdom and aging that's open to the public, and they provide ongoing webinars on aging and spirituality. So I want to introduce our first presenter, Bill McKibben. Bill, you can turn on your camera if you like. Hi. So I wake up every morning to tweets from Bill, and I just love his email newsletters. I feel that they keep me informed. As some of you know, Bill is one of the founders of 350.org, one of the first major environmental organizations. And now he's the founder of Third Act, which organizes people after midlife, people 60 and over, for action on climate and social justice. His current campaign urges older adults with resources to move their money out of banks that fund fossil fuels. And I am waiting with my bank accounts to be ready to do this with hundreds, maybe thousands of other people as we move toward the end of the year and no longer support the banks that are funding the climate crisis. Bill played a leading role in opposition to several big pipelines. He launched the fossil fuel divestment campaign, which led to endowments of more than $40 trillion stepping back from oil and gas and coal. His 1989 book, The End of Nature, woke us up to climate change, and it was followed by 20 more books, including most recently his memoir, The Flag, the Cross, and the Station Wagon. He's a columnist for New Yorker. I urge you to read his column there. He serves as the Schumann Distinguished Scholar in Environmental Studies at Middlebury College, and he's won the Gandhi Peace Prize and the Right Livelihood Award. So Bill, please give us a sense of how people can engage the climate crisis with the community at Third Act.
Well, Connie, first of all, many, many thanks for having me here. Congratulations on the new book. Many thanks for all your good work. And it is a pleasure to get to join this remarkable panel of people today. I'll tell you a little bit about Third Act and where it came from. I've spent, as you said, my life working on the climate crisis, the biggest thing humans have ever done and the biggest trouble we've ever gotten ourselves into. And most of that time, I've been doing it with mostly younger people. I founded 350.org with 7 college students. And when we launched this big divestment campaign, a lot of it happened on campus. And so there were college students, and truly wonderful. When they got out of college, they wanted to keep working. So they formed the Sunrise Movement that brought us the Green New Deal. The same all over the world. Everybody knows about Greta Thunberg, and they should. She's one of my favorite people to work with in the world. There's really no one I like much more. But she would be the first to say that there are 10,000 Gretas, and they have 10 million followers around the world. That's how many kids were out on climate strike in September of 2019 before the pandemic hit. This is wonderful, but I confess at some point I heard one too many people say to me, oh, it's up to the next generation to solve these problems. And that struck me as both ignoble and impractical. For all their energy, intelligence, idealism, young people lack the structural power to by themselves deal with crises of this scale. So that's why we started thinking about third act, because people over the age of 60 in this country, in America, represent an enormous block of people, about 70 million of us, bigger than the population of France. Not only that, we punch way above our weight politically. We all vote. There's no known way to stop old people from voting. And we ended up with, fairly or not, most of the money. Baby boomers and the silent generation aren't all rich, but between them, they have about 70% of the country's financial assets, compared to about 5% for millennials. So if you want to trouble Congress or you want to trouble Wall Street, and I want to do both, it'd be a good idea to have some people with hairlines like mine engaged in this work. So we set out to build Third Act, a bunch of us. My principal colleague is a wonderful woman named Akaya Windwood, who I recommend to all of you. But what we discovered was that there's some work been done in these areas, and I'm really glad that there's people from Elder Action Network here, but less than you would expect given the size of this population. And the reason, I think, is that political scientists have long held that people become more conservative as they age. And there's a little bit of statistical evidence for that, but less than you might suspect. And I think it's becoming completely untrue with the generation now coming of age. If you're in your 60s or 70s or 80s now, you spent your first act in that period of remarkable social, cultural, political transformation, where we started taking women seriously as political actors, the apex of the civil rights movement, the first Earth Day and the birth of modern environmentalism, on and on and on. Maybe taken as a whole, our second act was slightly more devoted to consumerism than to citizenship. That's water under the bridge. We emerge now with resources, with a lifetime of skills, with time, which we may not have had before, and with kids and grandkids in many cases, who make that abstract concept of legacy very concrete. Your legacy is the world that you leave behind for the people you love the most. And at the moment, the world we're going to leave behind is a lot worse than the one that we found, at least in physical terms, and that's not fair, and it's unhappy. We can change it. So as you say, we've launched this third act thing, and it's gone extraordinarily well. We're only about 8 months old, but tens of thousands of people flooding in. And one of the things we're discovering is how much fun it is to work hand in hand with young people on this work. I'll tell you, I just came back from we're doing a big demonstration outside a bunch of banks in New York. And there were lots and lots of high school kids there because they understand this crisis better than anyone, because they know they're going to have to live their whole lives with it. So they were out in the front of the march because they're a little sprier, but there at the back was a big crowd of us third actors walking under a banner that said "Fossils Against Fossil Fuels." And it was great relief and fun for the kids who were there to see older people acting the way that we need elders to act in this world. When young people occasionally come at me and say, "Oh, okay, boomer," or whatever, I just nod and smile because I know there's some truth into what they're saying. But I will sometimes say, say what you will about our generation, but we did produce the greatest music that the world's ever seen. And that's been important in this third act story because so many of those icons have been joining up to help. Carole King or Neil Young or Bette Midler or Patti Smith or whoever it is. It's been really fun to kind of bring that exuberance to bear. Because I don't think that if we're going to do this kind of work, and we also work on trying to protect our democracy at Third Act. That's our other cause, because we think it's very much in peril, just as our climate is. We think that some of this, this work has to be done seriously, and it has to be done with real commitment, but it also has to be done in a spirit that that goes beyond the kind of solemn or sober. and into the really joyful. We need to be able to celebrate the fact that we bring power and experience to these fights, and that we are able to not have to lead them all, to be able to back up people from other generations doing exceptional work. So it's been extraordinary fun for us, and it just keeps growing. I hope people will join in. We're about to announce the huge day of action that will actually be in the early spring around the banks. Some of us will be sitting in and probably going to jail. Others will be underwater, cutting up their credit cards against dying coral reefs, or out on the fire-scarred forests of the California, making the case. We have to figure out how to bring everything that we've done in our lives to bear eloquently on the future, and we can. So I'll just drop in this link for third act into the chat, and we will look forward to having whoever wants to make a little bit of trouble join in with us. Many, many thanks to everyone for their work, and Connie and Jim, to you for your leadership.
So Bill, quickly, the 5 big banks, and what is the plan?
Citibank, Chase Bank, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. Those are the big 4. And they're also the 4 biggest lenders to the fossil fuel industry. People have been signing a pledge that they won't, that they'll start changing their accounts, or more easily cutting up their credit cards from these banks. And the date's going to be, we'll announce it at our big all-in call on November 10th. We do these monthly calls that are a lot of fun. I'll be joining this one from Egypt at the big climate summit, but we'll have the full announcement. But suffice it to say, mid-March is going to be the day when we try to make people understand the tight link between your cash in the bank and carbon in the air. If you have $125,000 in the bank, in these big banks, it's getting lent out for things like pipelines. That $125,000 produces more carbon than all the flying, heating, driving, cooling, cooking that an average American does in the course of a year. Those things are hard to change. Your credit card's easy to change, and we can make a real impact here as we push hard.
Great, thank you so much. So if you hear the call, go to thirdact.org, sign the pledge, and join us. I found a community bank that I'm going to be using, and I am waiting, now I guess it's till the spring, to move in unity, move the resources out of fossil fuels. Okay, so I'd like to introduce Ron Pevney. Ron, if you want to turn on your video. Hi. So for 40 years, Ron has been dedicated to assisting people in negotiating life transitions as they create deeper purpose and passion at various stages of the lifespan. He's the founding director of the Center for Conscious Eldering, based in Colorado, which for 20 years has presented workshops and retreats to support people in bringing growth and commitment to their elder years. And he's the author of Conscious Living, Conscious Aging, and he's also a certified saging leader. I mentioned Saging International. He's a certified saging leader, as am I. So Ron, tell us about your center.
Well, thank you, Connie. Hello, everybody. I feel privileged to be able to introduce you to the work of the Center for Conscious Eldering. And I'm honored to be part of this distinguished panel, all of whom are committed to supporting the development of true elders who are so urgently needed in these times of both grave crisis and tremendous opportunity. So thank you for the opportunity, Connie. Now, I founded the Center for Conscious Eldering here in Colorado about 17 years ago as I approached my elder years. And I founded the center as a reflection of the work I've been passionate about throughout my entire work life. And that work has been supporting people in enacting rites of passage to empower them as they move and grow through the developmental stages and the major transitions of their lives. And the transition from midlife adulthood into elderhood can be a hugely significant growth experience if it is understood, if it's supported by commitment to doing the inner and outer work that can bring forth the qualities of the elder, archetypal qualities that seek to emerge in later midlife, but they need our support to do so. So our work is to give people in their later chapters an intense, immersive experience of the inner work of conscious eldering. And we explore the power of belief in shaping our aging, the importance of having a community of kindred spirits, purpose and intentionality, and the spiritual deepening that is the source of vision and healing. But what makes our approach distinctive is our strong emphasis on the journey toward elderhood as being a rite of passage that has the same dynamics that have empowered rites of passage around the world throughout history. And here are these dynamics. First, all true transitions require a letting go, a shedding of aspects of one's life stage that will not serve the new self that wants to emerge. And second, transitions require time in between, something we don't do very well in the world we live in. Transitions require time in between. This is often called liminal time or the neutral zone, when psychically we lie fallow, no longer who we have been, yet not knowing who we have the capability to become. Then, when the time is right, the vision, the guidance, the clarity for our next life stage begins to emerge as we experience a sense of new beginning. And this is the third dynamic of the rite of passage. And this emergence of a new beginning, new clarity, cannot be rushed or forced. And as we feel the call to our elderhood, if we trust and allow this process to unfold, and we support this unfolding through commitment, intention, and openness, then we gradually begin to embody the qualities of a conscious elderhood. Wisdom grounded in experience that's reflected upon. Equanimity amid turbulence. Ability to see the bigger picture in life's events. Passion and commitment to serving the community and the planet. These qualities that have for countless generations characterized those recognized by their communities as the elders. Now, another distinctiveness of our work is that we invite the natural world to support the opening of our hearts and minds as we do the inner work of eldering. It's being in nature, experiencing its rhythms and cycles and strong life energy, that we humans can most easily and strongly experience that which is most authentic and natural and life-supporting in ourselves. So we believe that any inner work is more effective when done outside. So our week-long Choosing Conscious Elderhood retreats and our weekend workshops all take place at retreat centers in the midst of great natural beauty. And much of our work at these centers takes place outside. And for many people who are familiar with our work, we know it's become identified with Ghost Ranch, New Mexico, where we have presented many retreats, although we also use several other inspiring locations for our work. So having presented this brief introduction to our work, I'd like to share a bit about our strong emphasis on what one person can do to help sound the moral voice of the elder in a world that has little, if any, recognition and little, if any, honoring of what elderhood is. For me, my understanding of the service and the moral voice of the elder is embedded in the words of the theologian Howard Thurman. Don't ask for what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and then do it. for what the world needs is people who have come alive. And as I look at those who I see as models for aging consciously, and those who come to our retreats aspiring to bring the best of themselves to their later years, in virtually all of them, I see commitment to coming alive by expressing their unique gifts, those innate qualities sometimes referred to as soul gifts. And such people, such elders and aspiring elders do not retire these gifts if or when they retire from their careers, but using these gifts is key to their aliveness and their fulfillment. So when I talk about signature gifts, I'm not talking about specific career skills or the abilities found on resumes, although these gifts often find expression in our work descriptions. But rather, I'm referring to certain innate qualities of being that we bring to our job descriptions and skill sets that support our being truly alive in our work. And for those of us not fortunate to have fulfilling work, and there are all too many such people, these qualities may find their primary expression in away from work passions and avocations. And using our signature gifts is about more than just our own fulfillment and aliveness. And Barbara Marx Hubbard, the esteemed visionary, teaches that when we use our soul gifts, the gifts of our true authentic self, we're serving as agents for the evolution that's seeking to unfold on our planet now. We've been given these gifts to use as our contribution to life in this time of great ecological and cultural peril. So using our signature gifts is how we can best make a difference in these critical times. And we run a big risk in not using these gifts as we age. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, if you bring forth that which is within you, it will save you. If you do not bring forth that which is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. So healthy expression of our life energy depends upon using these gifts. And not using them can easily lead to our energies being numbed through depression, sadness, resignation, or energies being distorted through anger, illness, discontent, and various addictions. So in closing, I meet many people who say, well, I don't know what my signature gifts are. And they long to know. So here's some suggestions for identifying them. Do some life review in which you look for qualities in yourself that were being expressed when you have felt the most alive, the most fulfilled, or like you were truly being your most authentic self. Ask several people who have known you for many years to describe what they see as your signature gifts, as those qualities that make you the unique person that you are and have been. And if you were to die today, what qualities of yours would they most remember and value? Write a short eulogy for yourself in which you enumerate those qualities that seem to have been yours throughout your life. And look at jobs you have had with an eye to identifying personal qualities you brought to the job that distinguish you from others with the same job description. If you'd like to learn more about the work of our Center for Conscious Eldering, I invite you to visit centerforconsciouseldering.com. I thank you for the opportunity to tell you about our work.
Ron, thank you so much. I think the most fulfilling part of teaching the inner work of age for me has been giving my gifts. And so I'm really resonating with what you're saying. And I'm often want to leave people with this question. What is the gift that only you can give? Because that can lead you on a whole journey for this time of life. What is the gift that only you can give? Okay, thank you. So I want to bring in Lynn Iser. Lynn, if you would turn on your camera. Hi.
Hi there. How are you, Connie?
Okay. So Lynn is an elder activist incarnate. She told me that she's motivated by her love for her kids and the beauty of the world. She's the founding director of the Spiritual Eldering Institute, where she learned about the opportunities of becoming an elder from Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, whose work led to saging.org, which we spoke about earlier, and his profound book, From Aging to Saging. She also trained with Joanna Macy and teaches her work. And today, she's going to tell us about her role as president of Elders Action Network, building a movement of elders to address the environmental, governance, and social issues of our time, and with Elders Climate Action, which is one of the groups under the umbrella of Elders Action Network. And I don't know if you want to mention Yerusha Saging Legacy Program, but this is another community in which she participates. So Lynn, this is your invitation.
Well, thank you so much, Connie. Thank you for bringing us together for this conversation. And I'm so pleased to be in the company of my colleagues that you've brought together, because I know that we're each committed to bringing forth and creating a more thriving and just world. And that is good for all of us. So I first came to this work of being an activist about a dozen years ago. I was, my stepdaughter was a teenager, and she was complaining about the state of our world. She was the youngest of my kids, and she was telling me about how much easier it was when I was a teenager in the 1960s. And she was naturally concerned about the impacts of climate change and environmental destruction. Well, I too was worried, and I didn't know what to do, because I would wonder, just as Connie has asked, what can one person do? I knew that I needed support. I needed to work with others to create the impact that I wanted. And I also believed in the value of elders working together from my previous work in the spiritual eldering and saging world. From that work, I understood that we have a natural inner urge to create a legacy, to create and leave a legacy for future generation. And that arises as we grow older and we face our mortality. You know, at the age of 60 or 70, we know that our lifespan might be another 10, 20, maybe 30 years if we're lucky. So what are we going to do at that time? And what do we want to leave for those that we love? So our legacy is meant to secure the future for our offspring that we love, for Earth herself, for whatever is important in our life view. And this is really important in our work of becoming and living as elders. It's part of what we would call adult development, successful adult development. So these reflections and my need for a cohort of elders to work with led me to Elders Action Network, where the question of what can we do is at the core of our work. What can we each do as individuals in our personal lives? And what can we each do collectively to create systemic and societal change? Because both are needed. Our individual actions sustain and speak to our values. These actions may be as simple as using less hot water, or hanging our clothes on a line, or choosing what food we eat. But they strengthen our determination and they strengthen our purpose. And that's important in our lives. But we know that individual actions are not sufficient. They alone will not create the systemic change that's needed to counteract the enormous issues that we're facing. So we come together. And within EAN, we come together studying, talking, and acting together. We're creating power with others that multiplies our individual power and bring forth the changes that our hearts desire. EAN, Elders Action Network, was founded about 8 years ago by John Sorensen, an aerospace engineer, when he was entering his retirement. Like many of us, John looked around. He noticed the issues facing our world and his children's world, and he wondered, how can I use my years of life experience, my network and skills to tackle the problems that we're facing in our generation, to create the legacy that he wanted to leave to his loved ones? John's a really great guy. He's hardworking, he's been successful, and he's a bit of a visionary. And so from that, Elders Action Network was born. Within EAN, we have 4 areas that we focus on. Connie spoke about Elders Climate Action. We also have sound democracy, social justice, and regenerative living. In each, we engage elders by providing the inspiration, the info, and the information, and the ways to get into action. We know that for some folks, this might be the first time they feel compelled to dip into activism, just like I did a dozen years ago. And they need to not only do something, but they need to feel supported as they struggle with their sense of disappointment or despair. Let's face it, when we were younger, back in 1940s or 1950s or 60s, many of us felt proud of our nation, of our country. We knew we had definite problems. There certainly was the Vietnam War, there was racism, women's rights issues, and much, much more. But those could be fixed within our democracy. We had systems that we trusted to build a better nation, a better society, and a better way of life for all. Unfortunately, that is not the prevailing view right now. We don't feel that way. Whether we're on the right or the left, we share so much disappointment. And it's a challenge to figure out what's true, what we still believe, and how did so much go wrong. So our work within EAN responds to these concerns. So let me tell you about some of this work. In Sound Democracy, we're organizing teams of elders in key states to get out the vote and to fight against the suppression of voting rights. We work with the Environmental Voter Project and our state teams to promote voter information through public service announcements and communities of faith. We're so happy to receive our voter information for their newsletters and social media. Climate action is where we do a lot of legislative and policy work. And increasingly, we are partnering to support youth climate activists, in addition to our extensive work with climate action groups. Within climate action, we also have a dozen or more regional chapters where folks work on both local issues and national concerns. They're building a sense of community with others while fighting for a sustainable future for their loved ones. Regenerative living was inspired by Paul Hawking and Joanna Macy. It's where we explore how we can live a regenerative life, putting life at the center of all our decisions and actions so that future generations will have a habitable planet. We have ongoing chat and act sessions, learning how to eliminate single-use plastics and how we can electrify everything, for example. And we've just begun a podcast, The Regenerative Elder, offering conversations with inspiring elders. In our social justice team, we have monthly discussions focusing on key areas of social injustices. In the last few years, we've been looking at racism, policing, and wealth inequality. We offer regular webinars based on the book Me and White Supremacy. And following the conversations, we explore the actions we can take locally and nationally to address these injustices. We recognize that some folks want to learn together and act locally, and others want to get into action on large national campaigns. We honor the many ways that elders want to tackle and confront the enormous issues we're facing. This year, we're developing a new campaign with our partners. We call it Follow the Money. We want to expand our efforts, and we're working globally with others to put pressure on Vanguard and BlackRock, the 2 largest investment companies. Just like Bill was saying about the banks investing in fossil fuels, these investments are in gas and coal development, and we want them to provide climate-safe investments so that we can be assured that our retirement savings will not only provide for our own elder years, but will also provide a thriving and just world for those we love. We're offering a webinar next week on living a green retirement. learning to care for our own health, finances, and the needs of the planet. This is not greenwashing. It's led by a retired planner who also writes columns for Forbes and believes, as many of us do, that we as a society, as investors, must and we can do better. And on November 15th, we'll learn how we can leverage our investments to demand climate-safe funds in our Fix Our Funds webinar. So visit the Elders Action Network website. I'll put that link in the chat in a few minutes for more information and to register for any of these programs. So we're all aware that we live in tumultuous times. Otherwise, we'd be likely to spending more time enjoying our elder years rather than worrying about the future for those we love. And no matter how much I do, there's a lot of worrying, fear, and anger. That's appropriate in the words of Joanna Macy. Our feelings are a measure of our compassion, our concern for the world. We honor ourselves and our love for the world when we give voice to our feelings, which empowers our ability to act. This empowerment, allowing our love for the world to meet our suffering and our feelings, helps us as elders to find our voice, perhaps our moral voice, and then speak in the public square for the welfare of all, which is a true job of an elder. So this is a foundation of our work in Elders Action Network. You're invited to come visit, join our growing movement of elders addressing the environmental, social, and governance issues of our times. Thank you so much, Connie.
Lynn, that was fabulous.
Thank you.
There's so many opportunities here for people to engage and offer their gifts. You know, what was coming up for me, I was in Berkeley in the late 60s, early 70s, and very engaged as a political activist. Mm-hmm. And what was coming up for me, and I wrote about this in the book, how different it is to be a young activist and an elder activist. Mm-hmm. What fuels our engagement is very different. Mm-hmm. And I think that conscious activism is really important for this stage of life, rather than acting out of reactivity, out of projection, out of anger. And what I've found in my own involvement with EAN is a community of very conscious, aware, socially sensitive, but also self-aware elders. Mm. And that's what I think that's why I really wanted to invite people to this community.
Great. Thank you so much. I love those words, conscious activism. I'm going to play with that a little bit.
Yes, that's great.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, thank you. So I want to invite Bruce Frankel to come on the video. You okay, Lynn? Can you stop your video? Hey, Bruce.
Hi, how are you?
Hi. So Bruce is going to introduce us to two organizations, Life Planning Network, of which I'm a member, and Pass It On Network, which is a global community. As co-president of LPN based in Boston, Bruce is editor of LPN Quarterly, editorial director of Redstring, which is a tech business. And he's author of the prize-winning book, What Should I Do with the Rest of My Life? And the best-selling World War II, History's Greatest Conflict. Bruce was formerly a reporter for USA Today and a senior writer and editor for People magazine. So Bruce, tell us about LPN and Pass It On.
Happy to do so. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me, Connie, to be part of this amazing panel and this day. And I just want to plug Connie's book for a second. Say, at the Life Planning Network, we started a elders circle to work through Connie's book. And I think these are professionals working through the pages of her book. And we've come to an amazingly deep and intimate understanding of ourselves and each other through using the inner work of age. So, I'm very grateful to Connie for the gift of her book And I'd also like to just give a shout out to Bill McGibbon, and it really is part of my own story, going back about 14 years ago, whatever it was, when 350.org was founded. I had been a reporter, as Connie mentioned. I was a investigative journalist. I was the New York-based national reporter for USA Today, covering organized crime, terrorism, and my entire career was focused on maintaining my objectivity and to a certain degree distance from being an activist. After I left on the verge of my in my 50s to go back to school and study poetry, I saw 350.org and when it was first emerging, and formed the First Action Walk in Central Park for climate action. And it was an amazing experience. I had never done anything like that in my life. I had, and the experience of, in a kind of ragtag way, creating some signs and calling people to join, and people coming from 350.org. And we walked around Central Park that day, and people joined us as we walked around. And something in me personally shifted as a result of taking action. So that became a lesson. So I just want to give those gratitudes out there before I begin. So Life Planning Network came out of, was founded 20 years ago in Boston by Meg Newhouse. The goal of Life Planning Network is it's an organization for professionals, loosely defined, who are involved in optimizing the second half, helping older adults optimize the second half of life, advocating against ageism, and helping people navigate to a more purposeful and meaningful life. It's a great organization for deep thought and for professionals to share across the different professions. So we have people from diverse backgrounds sharing across their particular disciplines. And it's, you know, we touch on many subjects over the course of the year. Some might be activism, some might be grief and loss, or politics and aging. And so for anyone interested in joining a group of professionals who are deeply engaged in trying to understand how to help their clients and understand the landscape of optimizing the second half of life, you know, we welcome everyone. The other organization that Connie mentioned, Pass It On Network, I've been involved with probably almost from the beginning. So I think now about 12 years, I think I've been engaged for at least 8. And we have, so Pass It On Network is bringing together age advocates from around the planet. We have over 60 countries represented in Pass It On Network, and the pillars of what we have been focused on are expanding lifelong learning for lifelong earning, digital inclusion, and activism in the sense of self-advocacy for purposeful work, motivating older adults to act autonomously and to advocate for policies and practices that will empower their lives and give them opportunities that are foreclosed, not just in this country, but around the world, and fighting for a international convention of human rights for older adults. And this blends into the question of the day, which I want to get to some of what organizations of older adults around the world are doing. but before I touch on that, in June, I spoke at the United Nations High-Level Political Forum, which was focused on recovering from COVID and building back better. And one of the things there that I pointed out was the numbers of groups of older adults around the world who are activated and taking actions, both in the area of climate change, but other ways, creating older entrepreneurs so that their self-sufficiency, creating learning environments so they're not digitally excluded. Many, many different ways in which older adults can empower themselves. Too often, older adults are portrayed, and this is particularly true in the climate change conversation, as the victims of climate change, or the victims, period. And indeed, older adults are more vulnerable than any other group, were more vulnerable to COVID, are more vulnerable to climate change and to heat changes. We just saw this in Hurricane Ian, where older adults, because of mobility issues in particular, suffered the greatest loss in Ian. I think there were over 55 older persons who died as a result of Ian. So the goal of Pass It On Network, but I think for all of us, has to be supporting and motivating older adults to act autonomously and to advocate for policies that promote and sustain the well-being, not only of older adults, but of the generations that follow us. Our mantra in the life planning, in Pass It On Network, but also the Life Planning Network, is meaningful work, paid or unpaid, through the last breath. Meaningful work, paid or unpaid, through the last breath. I just finished running a conference of geroscientists from around the world, who are all focused on the molecular aspects of extending healthy longevity by mitigating some of the ways in which diseases are facilitated through certain chemical activities. But the truth of it is, when I listened for 4 days, we know that as much health for older adults could be improved by improving the atmosphere. Air pollution is probably the leading cause of illness for older adults. Heat and air pollution do enormous harm to older adults. And we know also that being active and having purpose and speaking out for what's needed are really critical for and useful for extending healthy longevity. Studies have shown how beneficial this is. So just to touch on a couple things related to climate change, because it's such a good paradigm for how elder activism plays out, both here in the United States and globally. We know that the benefits of activism are that they enhance older adults' health and self-efficacy. We know that it creates a sense of generativity and answers a need for older adults to leave the world a better place for the next generation. And older adults can provide environmental organizations and communities with human resources that they need. But there are barriers that stand in the way. We know that lots of pro-environmental organizations have not been totally inclusive, or that ageism gets in the way of older adults participating, or sometimes that technology is used, texting or so forth, when sometimes a less tech approach might help to bring older adults into the activities. And older adults often say they don't know where the opportunities are. So organizations need to do a better job at opening up and making their activities intergenerational, and there'll be tremendous resources available in older adults as a result of that.
Bruce,
Yep.
I want to have time for Clint
Sure.
and
Sorry.
discussion.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just
Love
wanted to
you.
pile a lot of that in. Thank you.
Love you.
Love you too.
Okay, Clint. Hi. So Clint Wilkins has a long distinguished career in education in both independent and charter schools, and as a social entrepreneur. He was a teacher, coach, college counselor, dean of students, principal, assistant headmaster at Sidwell Friends in Washington. And after serving as a CEO of 2 independent schools, he founded Sage Hill School, the first non-denominational independent high school in Orange County, California. Currently, Clint serves as the convener of Encore Network's Intergenerational Affinity Group, and that's what we're going to hear about today. He was an Encore Fellow in the Mayor's Office in San Jose, designing intergenerational mentoring for teens. He was a visiting scholar at Stanford, an associate with Skoll Center for Social Entrepreneurship at Oxford, and on the boards of the San Francisco Friends School, Next Generation Scholars, and 1% for Education. Clint, I'm so honored that you agreed to talk to us today about the Intergenerational Affinity Group. And Bruce, you and I are going to go off a video and give him the stage.
Sorry.
Thanks, Clint.
Thanks, Connie. What a Herculean effort to put all this together. It's truly impressive. I'm Clint Wilkins, and in my previous career, as Connie mentioned, I was a teacher, dean, and school principal. And now, as an elder, my beat is mentoring and leading an affinity group that focuses on intergenerational matters. What can one person do as an elder? What is our moral voice as elders? And how do we make the most of these tumultuous times? I'm no stranger to these questions. In fact, it reminds me of my many years in Quaker schools. These questions are really queries, which are questions designed to disturb moral complacency. In other words, to inflict the comfortable. And it's in that sense that I'm going to tell you a story. Once upon a time, actually, it was only a few years ago, I participated in an initiative that embeds older folks in nonprofit and civic organizations. For 2 years, I was an Encore Fellow in the Mayor's Office of San Jose, and I was charged with building a mentoring program for a Silicon Valley nonprofit. I like to tell people that an Encore Fellow is a person too old to rock and roll and too young to die. For the first 6 months, my team and I were well on our way to building something rather conventional, pairing individual mentors from major corporations with individual high school youths from under-resourced backgrounds. We had a clear focus, preparing them for their job internships and offering them the opportunity to explore a wide variety of careers. Then in March of 2020, we hit tumultuous times. COVID forced us to go back to the drawing board. And necessity being the mother of invention, and this being Silicon Valley, almost immediately we decided to go virtual. And we decided to work in groups. We would meet once a week in small intergenerational groups for an hour on Zoom, our focus still on career exploration. We realized almost immediately that we had happened onto something powerful. Going online took away a whole raft of administrative hassles and enabled us to meet up together with great ease. And working in groups provided mentors and youth alike with a rich mix of personalities and personal interests, not to mention a certain safety in numbers. From the start, our mentors dropped all pretense, openly sharing their career ups and downs, successes, and failures. And quickly thereafter, our youth did the same. So with these pretenses aside, the atmosphere became at once purposeful, relaxed, and fun. And not only that, we gave our youth the opportunity to become stakeholders. We formed a youth advisory council of youth leaders. We called them go-getters, and they would take the lead in assessing the previous week's session and vet the upcoming week's program. These youth leaders became co-designers, and in so doing, they said the program had become youth-proof. It was a home run. It was a far greater experience than our original pre-COVID one-on-one design could ever have been. For one, teenagers love working in groups. For another, at the end of our pilots, each of our pilots, nearly 75% of us, mentors and youth alike, were in a far better position to make an informed choice about longer-term mentoring relationships. But perhaps most importantly, nearly all of our youth, not to mention our mentors, seemed to find their voice. What we did is pretty much what any elder can do in tumultuous times, with, of course, a little training. The key to good mentoring, whether one-on-one or in groups, is your own authenticity and the ability to listen deeply at times. But with one caveat, we elders need to brace ourselves. When youth find their voice, they can bring with it a whole raft of contrarian behavior and skepticism. As one expert on adolescence once wrote, every teenager has their own built-in crap detector. Moreover, you can't fake it with them. If they sniff even a hint of putting on airs, they'll write you off in a nanosecond. That's because teenagers are deeply moral beings. Having spent my entire adult life in their good company, I've come to understand that they have within them a natural sense of idealism. They're old enough to see the world, that the world is full of injustice, but they're still young enough not to have made their peace with it. This causes a certain cognitive dissonance. If we deny them their ability to express this idealism, this dissonance goes unresolved and our youth potential curtailed. If they can freely express this idealism, no matter how far-fetched or contrived, and take action on it, this dissonance gets resolved for the better. And when this happens, they take their first steps towards their own agency, that inner confidence and set of skills that enable them to successfully make their own way in the world. Who better than our elders to set this in motion? This is why, for me, the moral voice of the elder in these tumultuous times is needed now more than ever. My story is only one arena in which we elders can exercise our moral voice. There are thousands of other ways. And our group with the Encore Network, our intergenerational affinity group, is filled with people with stories just like mine. In the discussion part of the program, I'd like to hear how you other elders do it. In the meantime, I would like to leave you with this thought. It's a moral act on the part of any elder if it helps another to find and exercise their own voice. And tumultuous times can bring untold opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Clint. Yes, very well said. Part of our giving our gift is to empower the next generations to have their voices and to have their backs, as Bill McKibben was describing in the march, to have their backs and to empower their voices. So I want to invite all of the speakers to come back on video. We have 20 minutes together. Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Hi. And Jim, I don't know if you want to join us. One thing that was coming up for me is how to build the bridges, because this is what I write about in the book and kind of what my attention is focused on. I want to ask you guys, how do we build the bridges between our inner work and our outer work? Our internal, let's say, resistance to activism. So for the people who are listening to us now, you might have asked what this has to do with the shadow. And you might have attuned and listened to yourself. There's a part of you going, oh, that's great for them, it's not for me. Or I don't have the XYZ, I don't have the power, I don't have the skills, I don't have the money, I don't have the time, right? That is a shadow character. That is a part of you that's carrying the resistance to engage in for the common good. And so for me, the connection between doing our inner work and doing our outer work is essential. It will stop us if we deny the call, if we allow it to deny the call to serve, it will stop us. If we work with that internal part of us and allow it to understand it and allow it to move out of the way, then we can engage and give our gifts. So I'm curious about how each of you, because each of you is so engaged, including you, Jim, building these beautiful platforms and communities. How did you overcome internal resistance? How did you overcome those parts of you that want to be a couch potato and watch movies, or want to hang out with your grandkids and can, feel that's enough? How did you do that, and how can you advise others to do that as well?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Clint, go ahead.
Shadow work, Connie, and I'm really enjoying your book. I'm listening to it on Audible. If you work with teenagers and younger people, the shadow's in your face all the time. And it can be really disruptive and problematic. But you just deal with it and you bring it to the surface, and you give kids a sense of agency, as I say, and take it seriously, and all kinds of wondrous things happen. So, I think really I feel really fortunate in spending a number of years in my career in Quaker schools, where we look for that inner light, that inner voice. And sometimes it's really troubling, but that's when the creativity starts.
Okay, great. Lynn, go ahead.
Thanks. I want to say two things. First is I feel like we all have our own way of being activists. Some of us like to be out in the streets. Bill's a great example of that. Others of us write, or we put together amazing webcasts or information out into the world. But it's also, as I said to a woman that was driving by a demonstration at Vanguard, she said, I could never do this, but what you're doing is so important. And I said to her, you don't have to do this. Just take this home and talk to your neighbor about what you saw. Mention it to your family. Say you think it's important. Just raise up your voice in affirmation. That too is really important. I sometimes like to say the public square is sometimes our dining room table where we raise our moral voice. But the other piece that I feel is really important is a piece of poetry by Drew Dillinger called Hieroglyphic Stairway. I don't know if people know of it.
Yes.
And it's what reminds me all the time. So I'll just share a bit of it. He says, it's 3:23 in the morning and I'm awake because my great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do when the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something. And that's another piece of our calling, to listen to the call of the younger generation and of the unborn that are waiting for us to do for them as others did for us decades, hundreds of years ago.
Yes, so a reorientation in time is really
Yes.
important in becoming
Yes.
an elder. A reorientation to our past, someone mentioned a life review, and really coming to accept the way that our lives unfolded, and a reorientation to the future, what we call deep time, 10,000 years into the future. And what will that be like? Our children's 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 children. Can we begin to imagine what that will be like and how we might contribute now in this moment to that time?
I'd just like to say, so for me, the way in which I began to, besides the event with 350.org, when I wrote the book, What Should I Do with the Rest of My Life? I ended up doing profiles of 12 older adults who had achieved things that I thought were significant after the age of 60. And one of my criteria was that they weren't just transferring wealth or prior position in order to do those things. They were sui generis. And one of those people really taught me a huge amount. And my transformation came from wanting to tell other people's story, but really listening to other people's stories. And Betty Reed Soskin, who, as many of you may have seen or know, Betty just retired from the National Park Service at 100. She, when in her 80s, challenged the National Park Service's plan for Homeland Park in Oakland because it had excluded the stories of Japanese Americans interned during World War II and Black Americans subjected to Jim Crow during World War II. And she stood up alone against it. And she ended up basically winning. They named Betty an interpreter of the park. And for the next 14 years or 16 years, until she was 100, she carried on her moral voice into the spheres of thousands of people. So there couldn't have been a better example to teach me that, you can stand up. And the thing about all those people in that book that really was a life lesson for me is they didn't look back on their lives with any remorse or regret. They didn't stay rooted in the past. They looked forward and created their lives by doing things day by day. And I'm often reminded of the Yale Doctorow's quote about how you build a novel, and that's like driving home at night in a car on a dark road. You can see as far as your headlights, but you can make the ride home the entire way that way. And I think that's, an instructive thing for people who want to take action, is that you don't have to have all the answers. They can, so, listening to other people's stories is, I think, a great path to it. There's a great return on listening.
Thank you, Bruce.
Yeah, I'd like to add one piece to the wisdom that my fellow panelists have just shared. One thing that we strongly emphasize in our conscious eldering work is that growth into elderhood requires a real commitment to growth, continual commitment to growth, and virtually no real growth happens within our comfort zones. If you think about it, when you have really grown, I doubt if it's ever been when we're in our comfort zone. It's when we are stretched in a way that feels uncomfortable to us. But we're acting in a way that feels really right also. And so what I really like to emphasize is that if you feel called to do something, something really touches your soul. Like, for instance, the kind of things we've been talking about here, injustice, climate issues and things like that. If something really touches your soul, then make the commitment to step out of your comfort zone and to do something, to take whatever step you can take, whether it's small or large, but take some kind of a step out of your comfort zone. And in so doing, you're helping to make a contribution to the larger whole, but you are also facilitating your own growth.
Yes, and those happen in tandem. Those really happen together. And that split between the inner world and the outer world is an illusion. They really happen together. And I think that that's so important to know. We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to have all the answers in order to give back, in order to engage. And at the same time, the return from our engagement can be healing, can be not only empowering, but can be deeply healing. Someone is asking in the chat, how do I come out into the world with my wounds? And I think exactly that. We come out with our wounds. We come out with our vulnerability. And part of the moral voice of the elder is the freedom to let go of the persona, the freedom to let go of the outworn roles and attachment to appearance and attachment to success. I call it moving from the ego's agenda to the soul's mission. And when we connect to the soul's mission, it doesn't mean all our wounds are healed. It doesn't mean we're perfected or we're wise, whatever that word means. I spend a lot of time exploring what that word means, but I think there's a lot of projection onto that. We don't have to wait until we're wise elders. And if you have a spiritual practice, that also doesn't preclude engaging in the world. Some people think, oh, they're either introverted or they're extroverted. No, these can really work together in our lives and enhance each other. Jim, I really want to hear from you before I do the closing.
Well, thank you, Connie, and thank you all, Ron, Bruce, Lynn, Clint. This has been magnificent. In terms of my comment on your question, Connie, I would build on what Ron just said. I think, this whole notion of change and commitment taking us out of our comfort zone is worth stressing in a time such as ours, when anyone paying attention is out of their comfort zone, shall we say. And I'm thinking, you mentioned, Lynn, at the beginning, and I know Bill as well, this election coming up. There's many, many people that believe that democracy as we know it in the United States is teetering on the brink of authoritarianism if the Republicans win this next election, given the fact that they're committed to the suppression of democratic institutions and voting rights. And so I think, sometimes we need to pay attention whether we're comfortable or not, and we need to take action whether we're comfortable or not. And I say this because that's what I've done virtually all of my adult life. And it's led me to the present moment, because I think once one is willing to engage and be made uncomfortable by the objective situation, that's when I found my passion. My observation is that many people feel that whatever they're going to do, it needs to be within sort of a comfortability. And I think that suppresses both their awareness of the totality of the situation in which they find themselves, but it also suppresses their passion, because comfortability becomes the absolute and everything else becomes the relative. But I can still remember the day. It was when I was at Harvard, actually, when I was in my mid-20s. I was doing my master's degree, and a friend of mine was walking back to my apartment, and he stopped me, literally physically stopped me as we were walking, and I was a little startled. Put his hands on my shoulders. He said, "Jim, do you know that there are 50,000 nuclear warheads in the world? And in the last 24 hours, 50,000 children died of completely preventable diseases? Can you take that in?" And he wouldn't let me move. Kind of forced me through a discomfort to take in some information that made me profoundly uncomfortable. And that discomfort led to actually me writing a PhD dissertation, because I couldn't get it out of my mind, and that has shaped the rest of my life. So I think this situational context, particularly in our time, is a crucial fact to bring to people's attention in a way that, in some ways, whether they want to or not, they're forced to confront some stark truths. And then the truths themselves, I think, elicit a certain pathway of the soul. So that's what
Thank you.
comment
Yes.
would be.
Yes, thank you. That's beautiful. I have been practicing grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, and holding them both together, because without the grief, we're not allowing ourselves to be aware of what's really happening. And without the gratitude, we're not really aware of our privilege and the profound gifts we've been given in the way that our lives unfolded. So tomorrow, the third day of our event on the inner work of age is going to be about retirement from the inside out. And I'll be exploring with Mark Freeman, who's the founder of Encore.org, and which is now called Cogeneration. They just changed the name last week. And Richard Leder, whose whole purpose is teaching purpose. And so I hope you'll join us for that. I also want to offer the invitation once again of wisdom circles. If you would like to read The Inner Work of Age in community, people are joining together to explore the book and do the practices together. Each chapter has a set of practices at the end. And as you experience them, you begin to go through this transition of becoming an elder. And so there are about 50 circles now. If you're interested, they're free, they're online, and they're leaderless. You can shoot me an email, conniezweig@gmail.com, put wisdom circle in the subject line, and I will put you together with other people. And my last point is there will be an online conference with Ken Wilber, Jean Shinoda Bolin, again, Bill McKibben, on the inner work of age, becoming a good ancestor, December 2nd through 4th. And that I'm going to put the link for that. And for that conference, continuing ed credits are available. So that's going to be available at retreat.pacifica.edu. And I hope to see you there. I hope to see you tomorrow as we continue this exploration. Thank you all so much. I'm really deeply grateful to you for sharing your life experience and your wisdom with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you all. This has been very deep and I would say inspiring and exhilarating, really to see what all of you are doing so passionately in so many nooks and crannies of the world. It's a beautiful thing. And this is what gives me such great joy convening Humanity Rising as we have day in and day out is I never cease to be amazed at the surfeit of human goodness in the world.
Mm.
It's just all over, and you folks represent it and embody it in such a extraordinary way. I just want to salute and bow to you as we close, because it is exactly what the world needs at this moment. It's
And
exactly.
all back to you, Jim.
Thank
Thank you.
Okay,
all.
everyone.
you.
That brings us to a close for today, and it's only day 2 of a 5-day program, so tune in tomorrow. And we'll see those of you who can make it to our after session chat group. You'll see the link in the chat box Stan just put in, and those of you who were panelists, you'll have the link to the after session chat group in the email that you received with the Zoom recording. So that does it for today. Thank you all so much. We'll see you here again tomorrow for day 3 of our 5-day program on the inner work of age. Bye for
Thank
now.
you.